Awesome. Really great to be here, as you can imagine, on a warmer day. It feels like that we're starting to get more and more often now, and we have a very special guest appearance here on Confab today. Mr. Eric Newell, would you love to give an introduction of your background and why you're on the stream here today?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hey, everyone. I'm Eric Newell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Stone Ridge Software, and yeah, excited to talk about AI and what's coming up. I getting a chance to speak about AI here at the AI and Copilot Summit in a couple weeks, and had several chances to meet with client executive teams to talk about AI, and it's been really interesting to learn more about it as well as kind of learn with some of the clients and what they're seeing. And so I look forward to talking more about that today.
Yeah, I'm really excited, Eric. This has been something that we've been talking about, like how companies really get enabled around AI because like we've seen so far in the last 2 years, like it's been kind of this thing that's been tested by a lot of people, so to speak, but we're seeing quite a bit of acceleration when it comes to inquiry of what agents can do, the first party agents that we're starting to see, third party agents that partners like us are
Yeah.
developing for like leverage and some of those features. But you've been kind of with this and tracking it now since really the GPT-4 days, right, at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. I think it was November 30th of
Right?
2022 when GPT-3 came out, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, the world is changing, and learning all about large language models and generative AI and all what all those words mean. And then there's been this like promise of AI kind of changing the world, and with everything, there tends to be more hype than reality right away. So
Yep.
it is going to change the world. It is one of those foundational technology changes like computers or the internet or mobile phones are. But none of those things like totally change the world overnight, right? It's going to change the world over time. So I think we're at that point now where everyone's like, well, I know AI is a big deal, but I don't know how to do AI right.
Right?
So that's what I am trying to help bridge the gap in terms of like, okay, good to know that AI is this force multiplier and it will change the world, but also like, how do you get there, and how do you get there in a way that makes sense so you don't maybe overpromise to your clients or to your own employees about like what it means and what it will do. And so that part's fascinating for me because it's interesting when you see where you're going, but you don't necessarily know how to get there. That part's pretty fascinating to me.
Right, and there's so many components of getting there as well. I mean, just case in point, just to highlight just a microcosm of that. Mark Nelson, one of our developers on the leverage side, I met with him yesterday for an hour, and we went through all these different concepts of how we use like the technologies we're going to kind of talk to here today to really address that need. But he's such a pro dev person that it's all this new type of tooling and capabilities that are involved there. And Mark's a sharp guy. He absolutely knows how to
Right.
do development. He's been doing that with leverage for quite some time. So if he's running into this, like from a development point of view, from a functional point of view, from a leadership point of view, there's just a lot that needs to be aligned for the adoption of this technology. And quite candidly, like I would even argue that couple of years ago, like even up to now, it's been kind of hard to do that because the tooling also wasn't as matured as it has gotten to now. So I think to your point, like it's good to hear that people are inquiring and they're curious, and I think we're starting to see more wins now as we start seeing some of these technologies that address the pain points that we had over the last 2 years, making it easier to integrate an AI agent, for example. So that's really, really kind of cool. But what is the work? Like maybe we can kind of jump in here, Eric. Like what is the work that an organization really needs to start to think about if they want to do AI enablement? Because my argument on here that tons of people have heard my voice all the time of saying this is a foundational technology in the future. It's not something that like we look at some technologies like HoloLens or whatever it may
Right.
be, where it's a fad, right? And I know there's a lot of stuff that's not good with it, but it's getting better and better every day, and it is something that's more applicable in mass market compared to, as you can imagine, HoloLens or some of these other technologies. So I guess the question is, how do we even start that?
Well, the interesting thing, and maybe taking it at a really high level, like you mentioned with the conversations with Mark, you almost have to like unlearn some things
Right?
to learn AI because we've all been doing Google searches for 20 years. And now the way you Google search, now the way just taking something as simple as the prompting change. Well, now you want to ask more detailed questions and you want to specify outputs and things like that. So even just like Googling something something you've done for a long time, now you have to think differently about how you do that. And then when it comes to like building applications, like we were talking about, there's almost kind of a combination of techno-functional understanding in order to build applications as well too. You can't necessarily, um, you know, take someone who just knows the business process, like those people, pairing up with developers, like there's going to be a lot more that you can do as you're building applications now if you know a bit about the business and a bit about how to do things technically. And building agents and learning about topics and topic pathings and actions and multi-agents calling each other, that's all new learning. Like some of that has some similarities to what you've done in code, object-oriented code in the past,
Yep.
but a lot of it is different and different tooling. And just this whole thing we'll talk about, like deterministic versus probabilistic, which is a word I can't say for some reason, is it's a different way of thinking, right? Like, am I trying to get the right answer, or am I trying to get a good idea of what the right answer most likely is? I mean, those are foundational questions you have to like ask yourself as you're building applications in the AI space. And that's just a different way of thinking, right? We never thought in the past like about trying to get a good answer as opposed to the right answer.
And I just want to, I was pointing at it because I'm like, it is, it's like you're dealing with a machine that's kind of human. I know it sounds kind of corny in some ways, but the way that we work, there's a lot of things that we can get absolutes around, but there's a lot of things in a business process that are just more general, right? Because we always talk about exceptions, for example, inside of a business process. The generality is really where large language models live, is where they're not about. I think we even, there was a company meeting that we did, Eric, where we did the machine learning versus the AI. And I think I even
Right.
said, I was like, machine learning is about accuracy, is what we're trying to get to. AI and intelligence is about generalization and being hopefully statistically correct, right? Like that's kind of where you're going with AI models here. So it's really, like you said, those different types of deterministic versus probabilistic, those absolutely are where you need to start framing your mind around. Like as a developer, the large language model is, it can give a lot of different output to you, and you've got to think in generality of where you want that output to be directed as you go through that process. So I know it's getting a little techy, right? But it is really
Yeah.
powerful.
Well, the thing that I try to explain is the really step change difference between what AI does is like in the past when you were writing code and you said 3 plus 3, that the code is going to return 6
Six.
if it will you can reverse engineer it and figure out how it's going to get there.
Yep.
If you say um, what are the things that led to the French Revolution, um, just to pick some random thing off the top of my head, but like, and you put that into a large language model, you're probably going to get 6 different answers between the top large language models, and they're not going to know where the answer came from.
Yep.
Like, they're not going to go necessarily reverse engineer, oh, this is why I got this particular answer to that question. So that's why it's like truly artificial intelligence now, where before it was more like machine learning, or what you and I used to talk a lot about is like pattern matching on steroids, right?
Right.
Like seeing all these patterns and then predicting the next output based on the patterns that you had given it. Here now we're you're pattern matching, but you're pattern matching off of 1.7 trillion parameters of things that have been on the internet for years. Like it's really hard to go trace back to go, oh,
This exact
that
thing.
was the trigger point that ended up giving me this particular answer.
Yep, 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 yep. Well, I guess with that, just before we start, I'm going to flip over to the presentation here because I know you've got some slides to kind of go through as well, Eric. One of the things I just wanted to kind of note here is the fact that, like, if you have any questions, remember Confab is for interactivity. So we
Yeah.
stream to 3 different platforms: Twitch, LinkedIn, and then also YouTube. And we've got chat here. So if you feel like it, go ahead and give us an introduction, say hi. Maybe one thing I can ask of you just to even start is, where are you in your AI adventure in your company? It'd be interesting to hear that feedback because as we talk through this today, we can incorporate that. But don't be shy. I am really curious with all of you, like where are you at, so that we can, kind of tell you where you are compared to other customers, for example. Because it is interesting because there's a lot of different. I guess just at a high level, there's just a lot of different maturity levels that customers are at right now when it comes to AI, with some of them not even touching AI capabilities, for example, and others like really deep, like building out agents that are fully custom, that are addressing business needs. So we'd be really curious where you're at with it. So I guess with that, Eric, what is the work behind the win as we have here for our PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, happy to talk a little bit about it. And really what I'm trying to do in this is just give folks some background on like why AI is powerful, what are some common terms that you might be hearing, and then trying to make it understandable so that you can take these terms and figure out your plan for how you want to move forward, how you want to train your team, how you want to build an AI policy internally. And at Stoneridge, we're very much here to help you on along that journey, but it's also important for you as a client running a business to understand enough about it to be able to put together a good strategy about how you want to go forward. So the first thing I wanted to just share is like AI is a force or a resource multiplier. Like it is the ability to take your people that you have today and allow them to something X their productivity, whether that's 1.5 times, 2 times, 10 times. Like with AI now, you can get a lot more productivity out of the resources that you have. So it is one of those major technological shifts, like I've talked about with computers and internet and mobile phones. It is going to be that same kind of thing, right? Like we were joking about yesterday, like you don't do business with typewriters and fax machines anymore, right? So and it is one of those major similar. This is a similar kind of technology change that that we need to be prepared for, and we need to think ahead because we're going to need to interact with other companies using these kind of technologies. And if we don't do it, our competitors are going to do it, and they're going to, take our lunch in the long haul. So like, what are some of the ways that it's a resource multiplier? Well, you can do faster research. You can do an amazing amount of research very, very quickly with AI. You can produce content very quickly. You can produce slides, you can produce material. I've started really using, and I'll even show you in this deck, like the image creator now to create much better images that go along with the slides that I'm sharing. That takes seconds. I mean, that I used to do, pull the shapes in and make drawings and all that stuff, and that would take me like an hour to do if I could to do it well. You can work very quickly across your productivity apps like Outlook, Excel. I mean, the help in Excel, if you have not tried that yet, it's so much better than it was before. You can conduct transactions with fewer touches. Like, we've demoed in the past, like the supplier communications or the sales order agent in BC or supplier communications in F&O. Now you can like have email activity happening that you don't necessarily even have to touch. So you can move faster because you don't have to touch things as much in the past. And then like when you go on site to a client to have a sales conversation, like you can know everything about what's going on as you approach that conversation, because you now have access to summaries of invoices that are going on, complaints, collections that haven't been done, support cases that they might have in with your company. All of that stuff should be at your fingertips now. And ultimately, all of this leads to being able to make better decisions. So you can just be super productive, or like as you're thinking about starting companies now too, like you can do more with less people because you've got so much more capability at your fingertips with this AI as a resource multiplier.
Yeah, I love that, and I think like all these I use every single day. Like it's like it's kind of weird where to your point, like earlier in the conversation, Google. Like when I was younger, Google is where I really got good at being able to find search results, and then what did you do? You would search like five different articles and you'd read through it. Well, now I use AI to do it, and I know that there's a lot of people that are concerned about the accuracy, right? Which is something that's been improving with each model as we've seen. And I will say that you start to figure out a little bit when using the tool as to what is right and what is wrong to a degree as well. Like you still do your critical thinking, but if you want to generate content rapidly to explain an error message or to take, for example, the meetings that we do when we do a
Hmm.
discovery, for example, using that output to then have you're keeping track of notes, but then what I do is I take the transcript notes, run that as well through Copilot, as well as my notes, and I say, make a more cohesive version of notation based upon the transcript and my notes. Like you said, it's a force multiplier. It may have not stopped me from doing my notes, but it made my notes more legible. It made it more consistent. It made it easier for me to give that to other people. So it just, like you said, it helps really kind of take that pattern and that data and make it easier to share and easier to go faster, like you've said as well as you go through those processes.
Yeah, and the models, like you said, just keep getting better, right? Just, I mean, year ago, or a year and a half ago, I was trying to use the image creator and it was terrible.
Right.
And now it's like pretty good. But interestingly enough, there was one image that it got wrong in the slide deck that
We're
I
gonna
had
have to
to
take a look at it then,
change over.
right?
So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, like we mentioned, these are some of the ways that it's changing the way we work. Like it's changing the way we search for information. It's changing the way we get productivity out of applications we use. And now we're starting to get into this world of agents as well too. So understanding what a first party agent is, which basically means a Microsoft or a provider like that built an agent into their capability. Or like one time I used the State Farm agent because my daughter's car was in an accident and I had to file a claim. So I actually used their agent to be able to go through that process. And then custom agents, like you're going to show a little bit later today, but those are things where you're building a specific agent for a function within your business. That's going to be another way the work changes. And then just the speed at which you can do development. We talked a little bit our leadership offsite last week about like vibe coding and asking everyone to do some of that or experiment with that as well too, because you can build applications much more quickly now by being very specific about like what you want it to do, giving it all the ins and outs. But there's been this talk about like what's the next great coding language, and someone said English,
Yep.
like
Natural
being
language.
able to speak in your native language will be able to allow you to do those kind of things.
Yeah, you nailed it. Like right now, when like an example I even showed Mark yesterday, instead of using like reg expressions to figure out fields or values inside of text, now I just use like a O4 mini model, tell the model, extract these key bits of information, and if you don't, tell me what information you couldn't extract, and then return that value back for me, and I do it all in plain English. So it is like you said, the new programming language is just natural language, English, Chinese, whatever it may be for that model, which is pretty powerful. Two comments I just want to do before you move to the next slide. So Tracy said AI will save at a minimum an hour a day on general productivity tasks, if not significantly more as you become a power user. 100% agree with that, right? And then
Yeah.
Rob said as well, I'm vibe coding a power app for March Madness fantasy football, a fantasy
Oh,
game.
nice.
It's fun to throw away preconception and do it all with AI, which is pretty cool as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've heard many different, like, oh, it saves this many hours of productivity. And I don't think there's a good answer to that yet, but I know how much Tracy uses it, and I know it's saving her an hour. It's probably saving me an hour. I've gone from forcing myself to use it over the past probably, a year and a half ago. I was like, I need to force myself to use it. So I'm going to use it all the time, even if I don't get good results. And frankly, I've been frustrated at times with getting bad results for it. But now I am used to using it. So, and now the results are better. So I'm using it. Like yesterday, I was like looking for a specific language in a letter I was writing to a client around it, and I wanted to be precise, and so I said, "What's how should I word this?" And it says, "Here's like 5 ways you can word it, but here's what I would suggest that you do." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was the best answer." So like I'm getting more value out of it to make sure that I can do things effectively and efficiently, and it does take practice to get there, but once you get there, it certainly is a significant change.
So maybe this is the plug for the next slide. It sounds like you're going through your AI agent to interact with your systems. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I use, and I've talked about it on a few different things, but I use Copilot notebooks more than anything else, probably,
Yep.
because that way I can control the information that goes in and out of there. But I use it for everything I do now, and it's become so easy to share content through there. I can build tables, I can, all the, it's like the best of OneNote, Excel, Word, and LLMs all together into one thing.
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, so what I was going to share next was just the idea of AI as your new UI. So like you're going to be interacting with compute information in lots of different ways than you maybe were in the past. So I've used the Copilot mobile app a little, not probably as much as I know I could. Like as I'm driving into work, I could certainly go, "Hey, what's my calendar for today?" I've only done that a couple times. I haven't gotten into the habit of that as much yet. But Researcher Agent, if you haven't used that yet and you're on Microsoft 365, you absolutely should. It's amazing what you can pull out of that. That's what I use to build one of the agents that I built. Copilot notebooks. And as you will soon see, you'll be able to start using Vision to be able to take advantage of AI for those of you who are Tesla, self-driving cars fans, right? Like that's all using Vision with AI to be able to predict what's happening. So these are the ways that you're going to be interacting in the future. It's going to be mobile apps, Vision. Yes, you'll still be able to type things into chat, but like the days of using a lot of applications themselves, I mean, they're not going to go away completely, but it will be certainly lessening.
Yeah, and I got it. There's some comments here. It's just pretty cool to see people just keep on commenting on it. So Jesse Buchholz, Dwayne got me hooked on the Copilot notebook. So it looks like our sales team members and our pre-sales team, which is awesome, is using it. Cindy Oberg, I started using Copilot notebooks just a couple of months ago. They are very helpful, and I'm certainly not an expert as I'm still learning. Right, Cindy? That's the cool thing about it is that as you like with anything, like first using Business Central or CRM, right, or Dynamics 365 Sales as we call it, like you're not an expert at it. You don't know like all the little nice features of like filtering on the grids maybe or sorting it or grouping it. But then all of a sudden, you know what happens? You start just understanding more and more of how to use it, and then that technology improves as well. So it's awesome to see, Cindy, that you're using it. And then two other ones as well. So Rob, using a notebook to generate code makes the code follow your explicit instructions, which I 100% agree with. And Tracy was saying, really happy, Cindy, that you're doing it. Notebooks are like agents; they are experts of the content you put in them, and she's glad that Cindy's using them. So it's really cool to see. Like these are not conversations, Eric, we were having a year ago, which is just really amazing to see.
Yeah, and I have a notebook for like every part of our business. So for like our business central practice, I keep notes from every conversation I have with Anne, who leads the practice. I have all of our financial information. I have any BC client I talk to, I put the notes in there. So like I have it all centralized in there, but I can also say like, how's our performance in that practice? What are some things that we're hearing from clients that might be things that we could improve on? Like all that stuff's in one place, so I can ask those questions and get good answers based on the information I put in it.
All right,
So
that's awesome. Love
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so next, most everybody who's listening to this probably knows what an agent is, but it's always good to ground back to what it is. But it's basically a purpose-built program or piece of software which uses specific knowledge sources to respond to requests or automate activities or do some kind of automation, gather information using the power of the large language model. So, and we'll talk a little bit more, later on about like what's an agent and what's a good agent, because there's a big difference between building a basic one and building a more complex one.
Right.
But I'll also just jump into like what we're want to help you do, and like purpose of some of my executive AI briefings or even my talk in San Diego here in a couple weeks is going to be like, what is your company's road to AI adoption? Because we've certainly been learning it and reinforcing it at Stone Ridge, and I feel like we're in a good spot in many areas too. But like even we haven't gone as far as we could on some of the things like really getting agents in to the hands of everybody within the organization. So, but as you think about it, one thing I always talk about is like your employees are using AI today. So that's one of the things I say in all of my executive briefings. And sometimes the president or CEO will be like, "What?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "No, they are." And then the rest of the room will be like, "Yeah, I'm using it," or "I've got people on my team using it." And they're using, Anthropic, or they're using Grok, or they're using Gemini or whatever. And one of the things that I try to do at coming out of that conversation is like, what is your AI policy? Like, what is your AI vision to make sure that you have a strategy that you're putting in place throughout your company so they know what is acceptable and what isn't. So, defining and I'll kind of skip through that, but like, what is your AI vision and policy is a really important thing I think that companies need to establish within their organization and talk about what's acceptable use, what's not acceptable use. You want to encourage people to use AI, but you also want to encourage them to use it safely. And that's part of why we put together this flight plan that Tracy is our leader of as well too, because the whole idea behind that is like, we want you to encourage your team members to use it, but we want you to do it in a safe way. Like, we don't want you compromising things. And like, if you take your secret sauce, or you like take a product that you make internally and you put all of the specs of that into a model that and say, "Hey, what do you think of these specs for building, I don't know, whatever it is, the widget?" And now that model may be able to use that to train the model in the future. So you may have just exposed your secret sauce to the outside world. So those are the things you want. And then internal, there's also the ability to have oversharing of internal information as well too. So those are the things that an AI vision and policy will help give you.
Yeah, I love that. That's something we've talked about, like a governance framework that you really look at to put in place for it, and to document it, because kind of to your point, Eric, like the risk is there, right? It's a real risk of, like, especially when it comes to maybe proprietary information. When you think about Copilot, for example, by default on the Microsoft side, they don't use your data to train models. Can you? Yeah, you can technically. You can go into the system and say, yeah, I do want to share my data, but by default, it's an opt-in model, so you have to actually opt in to go through and do that. And quite candidly, like I think the usage of how you interact with Copilot on a large language model is more important for Microsoft than actually the data going into the large language model. Because if you look at like what they have to do to train these models, like it's a gargantuan task. And once again, the argument here is that you want to make sure that you put really those guardrails in place and give a large language model that you can access that's really productive, but don't allow employees then to go through and then, for example, copy and paste into Grok, which may not have those governance controls built in place. And that I do agree, like that is kind of scary. And if you're saying no to it, like you said, people are going to use it because it makes their jobs easier, and so you probably need that policy in place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about, protecting yourself from outsiders and protecting yourself from insiders. And outsiders more about what information you put into the model that they can take. Like you mentioned, most models, the train use this to train the model is set as on by default. With Microsoft's Copilot, it's not on.
Yep.
But so you're essentially, if you're letting everybody do whatever they want in there, they could be exposing that information, or like, hey, help me summarize this client list of our major clients in the East Coast, and you put all your client lists in there. Well,
Right.
could it could gather that information. That's just like posting that on Facebook.
Yep.
So you wouldn't have your employees do that. And then the protection from insiders is more about your access control and sharing. If I send you an email that says, "Hey Scott, here's our payroll from last year," and I said, and I say, available to all employees of Stoneridge, well then somebody could go out there and they could search for it and they could find that file, or they could get asked questions. They wouldn't necessarily even need to find the file. They could say, what's Scott's salary from last year? It'd be like, oh, well, based on this spreadsheet that Eric shared with the whole company, I can go in and find it now.
Right.
Like that's the kind of like protection from insiders that you need to be prepared to manage as well too. So that's partly why the flight plan like does some checks, security checks before we open it up to everybody. Because even if you do Microsoft Copilot, which kind of helps protect you from outsiders, but you run right into using it internally, you might be oversharing stuff from an insider perspective as well too. So that's an important piece to keep in mind.
Yeah, and not to not make people like I FUD, right? There's absolutely security and governance with it. I'll just say this really explicitly, especially for IT people. If you have followed the rules around security with SharePoint, permissions on files, things of that nature, you've done a fantastic job. And more than likely, you need a governance audit more than maybe governance to be instilled with it. Because quite
Yeah,
candidly, an agent doesn't make it so that you're less secure. An agent just makes it so that it can search the data a lot faster, which means
right.
if you had it before you introduced the agent, you still had an issue, you just didn't see it. So that I think is what's being highlighted by some of these Copilot scenarios, is that there is the what if, but if, for example, Eric shared his inbox with me in Outlook, well, technically that's on behalf of Eric. So my agent that runs with my login, for example, may be able to access that information then inside of my inbox. So you got to think through some of the best practices when you design agents too, to help restrict obviously what that agent can do, just like you would do with an individual. And that's the really cool thing, is that we can do that obviously as well on the Microsoft platform.
Yeah, you said it really well. Like if you've been doing all the right things from a security standpoint, then you don't have a risk, or you have a minimal risk, going forward. It's just that like first line I put there is like security by obscurity
Right.
doesn't work,
Yep.
right? Because now it's going to find those things. Like if I put a payroll file, but I hid it 7 layers deep in a folder structure that nobody knew about, like even if I didn't secure that right, probably no one would have found it. But now if they ask the question, like it's going to come up. So that's how to think about like security from an insider perspective.
Right. Agreed.
But the other big thing, and we're seeing a lot of this, and it's actually driving a lot of projects that we're getting involved in now, is you've got to have clean data for AI to be effective, right? If you have a bunch of garbage data, your AI is not going to be very good. So you've got to figure out how, so data governance, which again is kind of like security. If you've been doing the right thing all along, this is going to be fine. If you've ignored it, or you're like, yeah, our CRM system is a mess, we haven't cleaned it, we've got, quadruple versions of, I do still remember the client that told us they had 70 copies of one client in their
Oh my
database because of
gosh.
the different names that they had over the years. Like, if you still have that problem, like, AI is not going to do much for you because it's going to give you confusing results. But if you can clean up your data, understand what your source of truth is, like what is that central source. As we talk about MCP in the future now, you might not have to duplicate that over to 4 different, applications anymore. But you do still need that one central source of truth for your data. And if you have that and it's clean, wow, you're going to get to a lot of value from AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big learning that we went through. So with generative AI, where we do emails and things like that's not as big of an issue. But when we need to make decisions based off of data inside of a business system, the cleanliness of that data and the accuracy of the agent are directly related. So the more accurate the data is, the better results you get with the agent. And the less quality you have for your data, the less accuracy or the more hallucinations or the more improper output that you'll get basically from the agent. So it's not something that we really thought about at the very beginning, to be quite candid, because we were taking emails and extracting data out of it and generating content. But when we applied it to business systems as technology, that absolutely changed how we had to start looking at it, right?
Well, and I hate to be the cobbler with broken shoes of their own, but like, we have our own problems within our own CRM application. Is, we've just added on to it over the years, over and over and over again, but we've not done a great job of enforcing rules in certain areas. So what that's led to is we have multiple copies of data, or we have data that's not maintained as effectively as it could be. So that's one of our internal projects this year. We're not gonna like build a whole bunch of new entities in CRM. Our whole focus is like, let's use what we have and let's make rules around it so that everyone is following those rules, so that our data is tight, which is then going to give us much better results from CRM. And so it's almost like, yeah, I don't need to go build other applications because maybe I'll be able to use AI to do that in the future. But if your base of data is not good, then you're going to end up, no matter what cool app you build, it might not be very accurate.
Nailed it. Absolutely nailed it.
So when we talk about rolling out Copilot to your organization or rolling out any AI tool, it's really about rolling it out in waves is what we recommend. So that's what we do in the flight plan. We get started with a small group of, 8 to 12 people or something like that. Make sure that you've got your adventurous users who are willing to give it a try and willing to do the things like practice prompting every day. Like, we had a Microsoft person in our leadership event, I think it was a year and a half ago, like 11 minutes a day is how often you should practice prompting to get good at it. So you got to make sure that the people that first start with it are using it and are practicing with it, or maybe getting into Copilot notebooks or whatever it might be. But then you want to start to roll it out into waves of people that want to use it. So you then say, hey, here are the value that the initial pilot users are getting. Here's some ways we can use it. Who wants to raise their hand next? And then you take that pilot group and have them help the next group. And you kind of almost build like a ring system where it kind of rolls out in waves to your organization. And if there are people that in your organization that just aren't going to use it, maybe because they're not on a computer that much, or what, for whatever reason, like, you don't have to license them for that as well too. You can kind of roll those licenses out in stages, so you're not paying for something that you're not getting value out of.
Yeah, I'm just thinking
How
through.
should we talk a little bit about agents and what we've learned? You know, most of my learning comes from Scott, by the way, in terms of agents. I've done a little bit of building on my own, but he's been the one working with our clients on this stuff. So I'm kind of summarizing a lot of the experience that Scott
Right?
and I have been talking about.
Well, it's been fun. I'm very happy you've been tackling them too, right? So, like Tracy would say, part of the output, and I know she's online here, part of the output of Flight Plan is that we build agents even as end users. So, you can have very end user specific type agents, and they do really great things, and you can get really deep into agents as well, right? And I think what I
Yeah,
for the team here, just to kind of understand, especially when you look at like how do you get the win, so to speak, to get adoption internally inside of your organization. I think with the building agents, really what we really love to cover here is like you said, like how easy it is to build an agent and how maybe not easy it is in other areas. So what I'm going to do, Eric, is I'm going to click on the take control real quick here, and I know it's going to re-change some of the output here. Um, Let me just see if I can get it to navigate. There we go. So one final thing, I've got to just resize really quickly because it looks like it's giving the presentation mode. So 1 second.
yeah.
Let's.
As you do that, I'll just mention like it is pretty easy to build an agent. Like I was able to build an agent. I actually made a list of my, I think it was 40 or 45 favorite business books that I've read over the years.
Yeah.
And then I actually broke them into chunks of like five. And then I asked a researcher to go give me a summary of those books. And so it gave me like nine different Word documents. I stuck it in a folder. I said, in a SharePoint folder or Teams folder, I said, hey, go read based on these summaries and then come back to me with advice for how I should run the business based on what some of my favorite authors, the Jim Collinses and Patrick Lencioni's and Angela Duckworth and things like that would recommend that I do. And so that was an agent I built, and it's nice. It's useful. I use it. Um, is it changing our business dramatically? No, but it was pretty easy to build that. And again, I'm asking for advice, so I'm not asking for it to be perfect. I'm just asking it to help me in decision making.
Right. And I think that once again, this is the great thing about this adventure when it comes to AI enablement in the organization. You're going to have people that are going to want to build agents like that, and then you're going to want to go deeper, right? And what I mean by deeper is usually like aligning the role and the person basically to the output and the work that you want to do with it. So one of the things that I think is maybe not commonly known but should be commonly known is that when we start building agents, for example, they follow kind of what we do inside of our business practice anyways. When we implement dynamics, for example, we're always talking about the user role that interacts with dynamics to really get to the output that they need. And so an agent is very similar in that concept where you don't just build an agent to typically tackle one small little thing. You tackle hopefully a role or a capability inside of the organization, and you might start small, but the point is to build more automation really into it to really drive that. And what do you do to do that? Well, there's multiple technologies, right? But one of the big technologies that Microsoft has really focused on and introduced is this concept of MCP. And Microsoft didn't make the standard. Anthropic actually technically did, but Microsoft's been a big supporter of the Model Context Protocol. It rolls off the tongue as Eric and I were joking around about it. But basically, imagine it's just basically a definition so that a Copilot agent knows how to interact with an application. And I know that's really broad, but think about it this way. When we interact with our computer screens and we open up Dynamics as an example, or even Excel, we know what a grid is. We know what a row is. We know how to click into it to double click and right click and have context menus and all those different things that we interact with. But to a large language model or to an agent, it doesn't understand any of that. It doesn't understand like what is a form, what is a grid, so on and so forth. So what MCP does is it really provides that standard and that definition for an agent so it can interact then with a particular application. Now, what MCP doesn't do is it doesn't make it so that it understands your business process. And I think that that's a really important concept here is that MCP is all about how they access the system and interact with the system. It's not about how you do the business process. Because maybe, for example, you're a project based business, and so your opportunities don't turn into sales orders, they turn into projects, for example. Well, a agent doesn't know that unless you kind of guide it as part of it, but it could still access data or look for projects, for example, inside of Dynamics fairly easily. So there's a lot of these technologies that are being introduced that make it easier then for us now to use these agents and then interact obviously with them and even access different systems. So MCP isn't a Microsoft specific technology. We have it for F&O on our Dynamics side. We have it technically as well on our Graph and Outlook side now as well. There's a lot of different MCP servers that are popping up. But I think the big thing here is that without MCP, agents can't interact with applications very easily. What we'd have to do before, we'd have to create a custom integration into that technology stack every single time we wanted to interact with it. So this is a pretty big game changer, I guess, to say the least, right, Eric? As what is coming, so to speak.
Yeah, and this is one of those things like that wasn't there when we first, heard about AI, but it makes a lot of sense. And just like you would, build integrations between, three systems today, by going out and getting their APIs and making calls out to them. Now this is the same kind of concept, but it's using the ability to use natural language to go get that information. So just think like as you're building something for the agriculture space, you can go look at contracts that you might have in F&O. You can go look at the weather. You can go look at commodity pricing, and all you can do that all by making natural language requests, as opposed to like I got to build a specific integration with this API that has these fields mapped to this thing, and like the speed of being able to build an integrated app that goes across. I mean, it's going to be so much faster as MCP kind of gets adopted more and more.
Right. Yeah. And I think the other thing here is when we build these applications, like here's what's interesting about it. And we've talked about this even internally, and I think we've got a town hall meeting that Mr. Matt Van Dyke introduced me to that we're going to go through, for example, when we're building applications, how do we really understand, for example, the cost related to it, and then also the different steps. Because what I look at with this, Eric, and this might go to that deterministic versus probabilistic that we look at here. But what I look at is that I will, like a user, they do a process. They, for example, log into the computer in the morning. That is a process, right? Like we have to log in. There's lots of things that then happen from a technical perspective to then make it so your desktop pops up, but then you'll open up Dynamics maybe. Then you'll look at your sales order list. You'll look at orders that have not been confirmed yet. You'll highlight those and then you'll click on an action to do that. And what's interesting here when we build AI applications is that we're trying to basically make it so that when you have, for example, a task that needs to be accomplished, like how do we make it so that we can build that consistency to make it so that it's always precise? Because an email, for example, can have a couple different words rearranged in one shape, way, or form, and it's still a very valid email, right? Whereas a financial statement, if we take numbers and put them in different places, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a good thing when it comes to audit as part of that. So I think like when you're building these applications, thinking that you're going to have AI, which is all probabilistic when we deal with large language models, meaning it's trying to think or make a statistical reference as to what the next word is going to be, is not as good as having a Power Automate flow, for example, that grabs that data and there's no questions asked around it. It is grabbing that plumbing, kind of like humans drink water. We're just getting what's needed with that information to go through that processing. So it's interesting here, and I know, Eric, this is one area that you've kind of dug into a little bit more. I mean, what are your thoughts when it comes to this deterministic versus probabilistic perspective?
Well, I think it's a really important question as you're building an application now. Do I need to go get if I'm trying to create a contract, I need to make sure I have all the specific data so I can make sure that that contract is right. So that's a case where you would maybe use a Power Automate to go directly to the tables to get the information, just like we would have in the pre AI. But if I'm going on site to a client and I'm like, hey, what are some of the projects that they've been doing? What are some of the support cases they have? And what's their overall sentiment? So now I'm walking into their on-site, and like it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Like I don't need to know that they have 15 support cases versus 11 open now, but I want to walk in with some information about roughly how they're doing so that I can cue up the conversation in the right way. Like if they're upset, and I'm like, okay, now I need to know a little bit more about what they may be upset about, and then I take a different tactic in that conversation versus, hey, they're super happy, really excited about doing a new field service project with us. Then I can like focus the conversation a bit. So now in that case, I'm trying to go in with like analysis type of information versus precise information. And so as you're building agents, you got to understand like who is the audience and what kind of information are they going to want to walk into the room with or walk into the transaction with. And that's one thing that you've learned a lot on a lot of these projects that we've done where some of the clients have been expecting 100% accuracy on some of the data. Well, if you just use AI to do it, you don't get 100% accuracy.
Right. And that's where it comes to like in the next slide here, like how to build a good agent, right? Because when you think about the enablement in the organization, you got the governance aspect, policies, you got guidance, you've got subject matter experts or teams that you build internally. Just like when you're implementing Dynamics, maybe not as big of a scale to start here, but what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to understand, well, what is the agent that we want to, what is the role inside of the organization we want to automate? What data do they interact with? How do they process it? That deterministic versus probabilistic return. Are we looking for something very accurate, or are we looking for something that gives us a higher probability, for example? And then obviously we need prompts to potentially process that. And I guess, Eric, maybe what I can do here, just transition this just really quickly. I can open like an example agent. And what
Yeah.
I'll do here, Eric, is I'll share my screen, and then we'll represent then your detail. But just as an example here, and I'll transition on screen here. It's always fun being in charge of the broadcasting software. But basically, what we have here is an agent, just as a quick example, that would allow us basically to go through and do some type of processing. So this is an example of an agent that uses a combination of technologies to use the deterministic versus probabilistic type functioning inside of an agent. And just as an example of that, I know we're not going to have time to get into a lot of detail with it, but when we have this agent, for example, go through and do some of its processing that it tackles, and what's going to happen here, of course, is it logged me out. Let's get this real quick. So what's interesting here is that like when we look at some of these different types of technologies that we use, like this agent, for example, what it does is it uses prompts, for example, to grab data out of, for example, that user prompt that's inside of here, and then we extract, for example, a contract number by using then some of this prompting technology. So this is an example, and this is the mind shift that people have to go through where no, we're not going to create code or an Azure function to do it. Instead, we're going to use a little prompt that extracts the information and then gives me a contract number that I can use. And this is my programming language right here, where I define the instructions, guidelines, and then the output format that's related to it. So this is, once again, where I'm trying to take this and make it much more deterministic. I'm trying to really refine what that output and what those rules are that are related to it. But in other situations, as an example, if I just scroll down here a little bit further, this is an example then of a Power Automate process that I don't want it going and grabbing, for example, the AI system going and grabbing the contract detail related to it, because what I want to do as an example inside of here is I want to make it so that it's getting specific fields. So if I look at, for example, my sales contract here that I have, I don't want the model or the agent to be overwhelmed with data. I want to keep data really small and really clean for it to make its decisions that are going to be asked then of that end user. And just to kind of show like what that means, like if we say, for example, for this agent, I'd like it to go through and then process potentially a contract. Like you get to this level where, as you can see here, we've got the agent running. I'll go back to the overview. I'll actually go ahead and, for example, toggle debugging on this. And what the agent can do is it can interpret basically all of this information that we're interacting with to then basically, for example, process a contract. And then from here, you can see that what I've done is I've basically made it so that as it goes through processing now, I can see exactly what this agent is doing as it goes through and gathers the data and then returns that data inside of here, right? So this is an example of an agent that is built that will take data from one system and then it uses MCP technologies, as you can see here, the commodity processing agent, to then go through and then update the data. And how do I update the data? For each row in this thing, do these steps as part of it. So this is, once again, another example of what you do to create functionality using natural language to then accomplish that goal, which is pretty dang cool. So I guess with that, Eric, like think about all of this. Like there's so much that people have to navigate right now. Um, like what what do you do next? Like I mean, how do you I think you've got it in here. How do you keep up? And maybe you can reshare your slides and I can share that for the team.
Yeah, so I kind of put together like what would I, advice I would give and advice that we are using internally, and like how do you walk down the path to AI mastery? And of course, it's changing enough that by the time you get there, the path is probably going to go a little bit differently. But the way I laid it out is kind of the first step with your team is utilizing LLM. So getting them used to prompting, asking good questions, taking advantage of the Teams meeting summaries to create action items, create follow-up conversations, and then using it to create content more quickly. Like using it to create a PowerPoint or an email or something along those lines. Like that's, so if your team hasn't gotten through that step yet, that's where I would focus your effort right now.
Hey,
Because all of that's going
your microphone's
to
a
build.
little quiet. Sorry, your microphone wherever it
Oh,
is.
I haven't changed anything on my side.
That's weird. Okay. It's okay now though. It looks like it might be catching up here. So keep going. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so utilizing LLMs, getting used to prompting and asking those questions, getting better at being efficient with taking advantage of those Teams meetings recordings, using them for action items and summaries, and then using it to create content through slide decks or emails or things like that. So if your team is still a novice in that area, I would say start there and build up your skills and really utilizing LLMs from a productivity standpoint and from a prompting standpoint. Then the next two sections are really about like, as you start to work on your applications internally, like what is your data governance policy? Like I said, we're working on our own CRM project because we have data governance challenges there. So we've got to focus there on building out a better data governance and rules around how we use our CRM. And then being very clear about how we use the system and what each step of the process is to make sure that everyone's adhering to that same. So that's just kind of laying the groundwork for being able to get value out of it. And then you get into like, okay, now what do we want the UI to be? What do we want, how do we want people to interact with it? How do we want to gather information from what sources? And then how are we going to test the output? So those two sections kind of go together, but those are the components you need to actually start using, agents and using applications effectively. And then the next phase beyond that is like AI as a true multiplier. So where you get into vibe coding, you get into building applications with multiple MCP servers, kind of talking to each other, driving integrations. And then you get into agents talking to agents. Like you're building source library of agents that do certain things. Maybe they call certain MCPs, but then you can like build applications on top of these agents that you have in place. So that's kind of the final step, at least in today's world. I'm sure, a year from now, there's going to be something beyond that that you have to learn as well too. But so I would just say understand where you are as a company on that journey and then focus in that space so you make sure you've really mastered the utilizing LLMs component, and then you can start kind of building on it from there.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe just to just let people kind of understand like the AI is a multiplier in the vibe coding, because I'm glad that you're bringing that up. Just there are two examples that have happened that you can look up recently that are majorly impactful. There was, for example, I think Anthropic in a couple weeks built a C compiler, which if you've ever tried to create a compiler before, I will tell you, especially in the language of C, it's not an easy accomplishment. And they did it with a engineer that basically watched that AI for about a week or two to get to the output, where it would have taken a whole team a year or more potentially to build that. Another one is that Cloudflare rewrote next.js, which is it's basically a library, like a JavaScript library, right? Like Node.js, and they wanted to redo it in a different language because of performance enhancements that Cloudflare has. They had an engineer do that in about a week, and they said that they've tried to accomplish it multiple times before, but they were unable to do it. But they used AI, and that wasn't an engineer; that was a development manager that built that from the ground up. So this vibe coding concept, like as a developer, we talk about certain areas that really large language models are really good at. In language like coding, you're starting to see more and more of where if you want to be a really good developer, you got to learn how to do vibe coding to do that development, I think, longer term here.
Yeah, it's hard for me to even get my head around what that is and how it can be used. But
Okay.
yeah, the ability to build something very quickly, the ability to find a needle in a haystack, too. Like if you've had some problem that you haven't been able to figure out, you might be able to write code that can go, iterating over something hundreds of times to try to find where that problem might be. Those are cases where AI is opening up a possibility that maybe didn't exist before or would have been prohibitively expensive.
Right. Right. Well, Eric, I know we're a couple minutes over time, so just a big thank you for coming on here and sharing your expertise. I know you've had a lot of great conversations with leaders. Hopefully, I guess, I think you or we'd love to come talk to anyone that wants to go on this
Yeah,
AI journey, right? So if they want to
yeah,
contact us, I'm assuming reach out on the website. I'm sure Carly and them can post something in chat here, but is that kind of where you're getting involved?
yeah. Reach out, ping me on LinkedIn, or send a note to your Stone Ridge contact, and happy to come out. Like when I do the executive AI briefing, there's no cost to it. I come out and do it just to have that conversation with our existing clients. So always excited to do that, and yeah, invite Scott out to do kind of a technical review with the team, and we're happy to do that because we want to partner with you on this journey to get AI to be a resource multiplier for you. So if you're interested in that, we're interested in helping out.
Nailed it. All right, Eric. Well, appreciate your time again. Have a great rest of your day. And everyone that was on, we'll see you 2 weeks from now for our next Stone Ridge Confab. So thank you much for joining and have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Scott.